My name is Kelly Miracle, and my presentation is on curricular modifications for adapted physical education. Curricular modifications are any adaptation made to the general education curriculum in order to align a student's ability with the lesson content. They're intended to promote student success while working towards targeted IEP objectives and age-appropriate motor skills. Modifications may include changes in equipment, the environment, or changes to the rules of a game. The goal of curricular modification is to allow all students to participate in a way that is meaningful, safe, challenging, and successful. The challenge in making curricular modification is ensuring that all students are receiving appropriate instruction regardless of their skill level, and all students are working at the appropriate level for them. So changes that affect the whole group should be implemented cautiously in order to avoid negatively affecting the program for students without disabilities by failing to provide adequate challenge for them. Once you've made curricular modifications, it's important to frequently reassess the need for those modifications as your student improves. Whenever possible, modifications should be faded out as the skill becomes more ingrained. One way to ensure that your students are working at the optimal level of challenge for them is by providing differentiated instruction. Differentiating instruction is a proactive approach that involves giving all students in the class options for how they learn and demonstrate understanding. It's not an individualized program for each and every student and doesn't assume that each student would need their own separate, unique adaptation. It's simply providing options so that each student can make their own decisions on what's best for them. Whenever possible, you should attempt to use these modifications as part of a differentiated instruction model instead of making specific modifications for the child with a disability. The added benefit is that each student in your class can have the right amount of challenge for them, as well as increased opportunities for success and social interaction. The following questions are some considerations for determining whether a modification is appropriate. Will the student with disabilities be successful and challenged? For example, can a simple change allow a student with a disability to participate where they might otherwise have been standing on the sidelines or being consistently unsuccessful? Will the activity be safe for everyone? Will a student with less mobility or balance be at risk of being bumped or having someone run into them? Will the change affect students without disabilities? Again, changing the activity so that everything is presented at the level of the student with the disability will result in some students not being challenged enough. Ideally, a variety of targets, distances, and equipment should be offered so that each student can choose their own best options. Will it affect the teacher's ability to instruct and help everyone? If the physical education teacher has to physically assist the student with disabilities, are they able to instruct and attend to the other students at the same time? There are three categories of curricular modification. There are multi-level curricular selection, curricular overlapping, and alternate programming. Multi-level curricular selection is best for children with mild disabilities. Here, the general curriculum is appropriate, but it's above the child's ability level. Strategies include standing closer to targets, using lighter or larger balls, or larger targets. This is similar to differentiated instruction, in which all students are allowed to make choices in order to accommodate their own individual abilities while all working on the same curricular content. In curricular overlapping, the general curriculum is determined to be inappropriate. This is for students with moderate to more severe disabilities. Here, students work on their individual physical education IEP objectives, which are embedded within the activity the rest of the students are participating in. This allows the student to work on their own content at their own level of success, however, still be able to interact with peers. Alternative programming is also for more severe disabilities. This is used when the IEP objectives cannot safely or meaningfully be overlapped or embedded within the general curriculum. Here, the student works on their IEP objectives separately. However, ideally, students without disabilities can be rotated into this alternate activity, allowing the child with disabilities to still work with non-disabled peers. Models for making curricular modifications are developmental task analyses and ecological task analyses. Herkowitz developed the developmental task analyses. It's designed to identify task and environmental factors that influence movement patterns. He divided this into general and specific task analysis. The activities are broken down into tasks and environmental factors, then arranged from simple to complex. Then selected factors are further broken down, again from simple to complex. This allows the teacher to determine how the specific levels of difficulty affect the student's ability to perform a task. The goal is to perform the task in the most complex circumstance that the student can succeed in. Examples of categories are size, weight, speed, predictability of trajectory, length of striking implement. If you take, for example, the activity of catching, the general task analysis is using a ball that's large to medium to small, or slow to moderate to fast. Then specific analysis is taking that ball and looking at rolling it or bouncing it to tossing it, or looking at specific lengths or diameters of the equipment used. Herkowitz's assertion is that if there are accommodations to the student's deficits, then the student would be able to perform a motor task with a more skillful pattern. For example, a student with limited strength and coordination trying to hit a baseball with a wooden bat would improve their performance if they used a beach ball and a plastic bat or a dowel rod. Ecological task analysis was developed by Davis and Burton, who expanded on Herkowitz's model. They took into consideration what they thought were flaws or omissions on Herkowitz's part, where there is no consideration for the goal of a given task or the attributes of the student. The major tenets of ecological task analysis are that actions are the result of a complex relationship between the task goal, the performer, and the environment. In this model, Tasks should be characterized by function and general intent rather than movement pattern or mechanism of performance. For example, the difference in a throwing pattern between pitching a baseball and throwing darts. Both are throwing, but the appropriate motor patterns are different for each. Here, the features of a task are divided into essential and non-essential variables. Essential variables are the underlying characteristics that define a movement. For example, the relative timing between the two lower limbs in walking versus running versus galloping or skipping. Non-essential variables are things that when scaled up or down can change the movement into a new qualitatively different pattern of coordination. For example, is the distance you are from a wall when you throw with the goal of hitting it. If you're close to the wall, like when throwing darts, there's no need to step or have a preparatory backswing. But when you move further away from the wall, the pattern will change to include these characteristics and will be an entirely different motor pattern. Ecological task analysis uses the constraints model, which highlights 3 specific types of constraints: organismic, environmental, and task. Organismic constraints are the student's physical factors, which include their height, weight, balance, strength, coordination, etc. These constraints are difficult to change quickly or modify. Therefore, they are accommodated rather than manipulated. Environmental constraints include gravity, light, and the amount of space. The ability to manipulate these factors varies. For example, are you inside or outside? Task constraints are simply the tasks themselves. They can often be manipulated to make the task more or less challenging depending on the skill of the students. Task constraints can be further broken down into 3 categories: the goal of the task without specific rules on how to perform the task. For example, getting a ball into a basket or net, however you can get it there. Rules specifying a specific response or way to perform a skill, for example, a cartwheel. Implements that constrain a movement pattern, for example, having to hit a ball with a specific item. Using ETA, a teacher can determine the best way for students to achieve the task and set the conditions that elicit the most efficient and effective pattern. The values where the student will choose to use a different skill to perform a task will also be apparent. Specific accommodations. For students with specific disabilities, it's important to focus on the functional strengths and weaknesses of the particular student and avoid making generalized accommodations based on their diagnosis. There are significant ranges in ability within any diagnostic category. You should utilize team members to provide more specific information regarding a student's impairments. Information from the general ed teacher, the special ed teacher, and the related services providers can assist you with determining expectations and assist you with strategies to modify or motivate a student. Whenever possible, include the student themselves in the decision for how you modify a general physical education activity. It's likely that they can tell you what has been helpful or unhelpful in the past. Be aware that some students with disabilities would rather fit in than be successful, and they may not want modifications. It's important to honor their wishes. The 5 S's of equipment modifications. Surface. A change to the texture or color of the surface of the equipment. For example, making a ball easier to grip, like using this spider ball pictured below, or adding color to improve the ability for a child with visual impairments to see it. Speed. Slower speeds can help students with coordination deficits. For example, balls can be deflated or replaced with balloons or beach balls. Size. All equipment can be adapted in terms of size. For example, implements can be made shorter or longer. The striking surfaces can be made larger. Balls can be smaller or larger, as can the nets or other targets. Keep any change in weight that might accompany those changes in larger or smaller implements or balls. Keep that in mind. Sound. The addition of sound is crucial for students with visual impairments. For example, beeper balls to help with catching and kicking. Bells or other sounds can be added to targets or other equipment easily using Velcro or tape. Support. Increasing support when teaching ball skills improves the student's chance to be successful. Increasing physical support for students will mitigate balance deficits as they try to perform dynamic skills. For example, using a tee or suspending a ball overhead gives increased support to the ball, and providing a chair or support surface for the child who has a difficulty with balance or one who fatigues easily gives support to the child themselves. Modifications for students with specific functional impairments. Structural impairments are impairments of stature, visual or hearing impairments, or other physical disability. Functional impairments are difficulty with strength, endurance, balance, or coordination. Unlike structural impairments, functional impairments can typically be remediated using curricular modification. For students with impairments in balance, things you can do are to lower the center of gravity, increase the base of support, increase the amount of surface in contact with the body, increase the width of the beam, allow them to extend their arms, use carpeted surfaces instead of smooth ones, teach the students how to fall, provide a bar to assist with stability, teach the students to use their eyes optimally, determine whether their balance difficulties are related to health problems, and optimize safety, because students with balance deficits are more likely to fall or sustain an injury. For impairments in strength, power, and endurance, strategies include lowering targets, reducing distance or playing area, reducing the weight of equipment, allowing breaks or rest periods, allowing the student to sit or lie down while playing, which is also a strategy for balance deficits, using deflated or suspended balls, and reducing speed of games or increasing distances for the peers without disabilities to travel. For impairments in coordination, you can use larger, lighter, or softer balls for catching and striking, decrease distance and speed for ball skills, use smaller balls or bean bags for throwing, Often a one-handed throw is simpler than a bilateral chest pass. In striking and kicking, start with a stationary ball. Increase the surface of the striking implement. Use a backstop. Increase the size of the target. Use lighter, less stable pins for bowling type games. And set the pins closer together so that the child has more opportunity, if they hit one, to get more of them knocked over. Optimize safety, as students with coordination deficits are also more likely to fall or sustain an injury. Adaptations for specific types of disabilities. For students with intellectual disabilities, along with the previously noted modifications, it may be helpful to simplify the activities or the rules. For students with autism spectrum disorders, they may benefit from open activities where there's flexibility in movement and activity choices. It's helpful to use a step process, which includes modifications to space, task, equipment, and people. We've covered all of these areas previously with the exception of people. Due to social and communication impairments, modifications like decreasing the number of players in a team activity may be beneficial for a student who cannot tolerate large groups. And remember that a diagnostic label does not give much information about a student's functional abilities. This video demonstrates ways where modifications have been made to games in order to allow inclusion for students with disabilities. And here are my references.